Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our hosts an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers beat the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun.
All right. Well, we are very lucky today to be joined by Robert Mazur. I'm going to give a little bit of background on Robert before we get into the details here. But here's just a brief snippet on Robert's background. So Robert served for roughly 27 years as a special agent for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the Customs Service, and the Drug Enforcement Agency. He is the president of KYC Solutions, a firm that provides speaking, expert witness, and consulting services to companies worldwide. He is the author of two terrific books. I've read both of these, and I would highly recommend you take a read of them. They're similar, but they're also quite different in terms of the story that they portray. The first book is called the Infiltrator, which was turned into a movie. And again, as with many of these, I would, even if you've seen the movie, I would highly recommend you go back and take a read of the book. The book goes into a lot more details. And then there was actually a second book that Robert had read called the Betrayal. And again, I would highly recommend that people take a read of both of those, because although there's some similarities between the two, they're also quite different. Noticed in the title of the second book being the Betrayal. And again, quite a bit different than the first book. And he's also a very well-known media contributor, specializing in a bunch of different topics. But one of the topics we're going to talk about today is obviously money laundering, which sort of goes hand in hand with drug cartels and the drug trade. So again, Robert, thank you very much for taking the time. Maybe just to start off a little bit, maybe just give us some perspective on your educational background and kind of how you got involved in, at least in finance, perhaps at the beginning of your at your educational stops.
Sure. I got a BA in business administration finance, and before I got that at Wagner College, I had summer jobs, one in the brokerage firm, one in a bank. And so I thought I was going to become an accountant, but in my junior year, I was looking for summertime employment and maybe something part-time during the semesters so that I could make ends meet. And I came across a job at what they defined as a co-op student for an agency called at the time, IRS Intelligence Division. So I really didn't know what the Intelligence Division was all about. It's now known as Criminal Investigation in IRS. And they enforce the criminal tax laws, but have a very focused array of targets. Some are what they call general program, just wealthy business people that they would make criminal cases against, usually higher profile people, so the publicity will cause people to realize that they really need to pay their taxes. But there were other groups that were working there that were going after corrupt politicians, drug traffickers, organized crime figures. And I came to understand at the time that I was there in this co-op position that one of the targets was Frank Lucas, of great fame in American Gangster movie where Denzel Washington played him. And the IRS was focused on the bank that was laundering for them, aptly for a drug organization, the chemical bank. And so they were taking in duffel bags full of cash from Lucas's runners and laundering the money through their institution. And so the guys at the IRS were doing surveillance. They did interviews. They got documentation of the transactions and ultimately prosecuted the bank and one of the officers, at least one of the officers that was affiliated with it. That grabbed my attention because I saw up close and personal the direct link between following the money that took you to command and control, took you to the highest people within the organizations, because the only reason they do this is for money. And it's so much easier to follow the money and get to command and control than it is to follow the drugs and get to command and control. And so with that, I decided that that's what I wanted to do. And I began my law enforcement career with that agency and stayed with them for about 11 years.
And just in that situation there, you mentioned, American Gangster in that movie. It's a great movie. And is it in terms of what you're actually prosecuting in these cases, is this an Al Capone type of situation where what you're actually prosecuting them for is a failure to remit proper income taxes, and that's really what you're going after, as opposed to maybe necessarily, laundering money or perhaps again actually illegally selling drugs? Is your role within the IRS strictly to say, did they pay the appropriate amount of taxes on whatever their income is?
Well, that's one of the criminal statutes that we would pursue at that time. Unfortunately, until 1986, the money laundering statute didn't exist. And so we had to go after them for another one, another angle, which was a conspiracy to defraud the IRS by causing the failure to file at the bank of the appropriate forms under the Bank Secrecy Act. But also quite equally important, we were in effect, forensic accountants who were working along with the other law enforcement agencies that enforced drug laws. And, even if you're going to prosecute somebody for drug trafficking, you really want to get that evidence in there so that the jury recognizes that not only are these witnesses, many of whom have credibility issues because they are convicted cooperators, but you can't deny the fact that Frank Lucas got beneficial use of money that he couldn't possibly explain. And so, yeah, that supported the criminal tax case, but it also supported the drug case as well.
I see. So then you go and you leave the IRS for U.S. Customs. Maybe just take us through a little bit. How is the U.S. Customs different than the IRS? There's several government organizations that kind of deal with prosecuting folks that illegally traffic drugs. But maybe just talk a little bit about how Customs is different than the IRS, and why did you choose to leave the IRS?
Sure. Well, before I left the IRS, I was lucky to be assigned to work on a task force called Operation Greenback. And it was a joint IRS Customs initiative. Now, when I say Customs, it was officially Customs Office of Enforcement, which today is Homeland Security Investigations. So they do criminal investigations in many different regards with respect to those statutes that are principally enforced by Customs, one of which was, at the time, they were handling a lot of the money laundering prosecutions that related to major drug cartels. The Drug Enforcement Administration was more focused, as was the FBI, more focused on the actual drug case evidence, and Customs got into the niche of going after the money laundering prosecutions that related to these big criminal organizations. So I got to know the leadership in U.S. Customs Office of Enforcement. We got along extraordinarily well. And they came to a time when they realized that in order to be able to address the risks that they wanted to, they needed to increase their staffing. So they offered many special agent positions, and a lot of them new special agent positions, and a lot of them were taken up by former IRS agents or IRS agents willing to move from there. And it was a win-win for Customs because they really didn't have people who understand forensic accounting. And there's no better, I tell you, the best training that I ever got in my entire law enforcement career was given to me by the IRS Intelligence Division, Criminal Investigation Division. You have to have almost an accounting degree in order. You had to have, well, you only had to have 2 years of accounting at the college level in order to qualify, but you needed a college degree as well. But that requirement wasn't there for Customs or DEA or necessarily the FBI either. So I decided that I would move over to Customs. Here's what really got me there. IRS has always had massive layers of bureaucracy to review what in other agencies maybe doesn't get quite the massive review. So I was writing a search warrant in a case for, actually we got into a law office where an attorney was handling money laundering for a very large drug organization. And I write the affidavit, and it has to go through so many levels of review that you have to have fresh probable cause. Your evidence needs to be able to show that within the last 30 days, the evidence was where you want to search. And so by the reviews, you could barely get there within 30 days. So I talked to the customs agent I was working with, and I said, well, how do you handle that? And he goes, well, I write the affidavit, and then I go to the house of the magistrate, and the magistrate reads it, and the next day I'm knocking a door down. And I said, well, that's where I want to work. So that one was definitely, at that time, customs didn't have nearly the amounts of bureaucratic review that the IRS did. And they've certainly changed a little bit since then and have more of it, but it was an organization that really put its faith in the ability of the special agents that were charged with enforcing criminal laws. And so for that reason, I was very attracted to work there.
And take us back in time to that particular, period in our history. Walk us through a little bit. Give us some perspective on the drug issue in the United States at that particular time. Where were the drugs coming in from, and what was the goal of the of U.S. Customs at that point? Was it again to completely shut off the drug trade, get it down as low as it possible can? Is that really what the goal was? Maybe just give us some perspective on what it was like at least at that point in time.
Sure. Well, the Drug Enforcement Administration had primary jurisdiction with respect to the enforcement of Title 21, the drug laws. And so the way Customs got involved was that they took the lead on the money laundering side. We had and this would take us back to now the mid 1980s, maybe even early 1980s to mid 1980s, when Operation Greenback was put together. This is a period of time when you had violence on the streets of the United States. I mean, the most high-profile one is the Dadeland massacre that happened in Miami-Dade, where you had Colombian cartel sicarios with AK-47s blowing people away in shopping malls. And that was the norm, at that period of time. Almost all of the cocaine was coming from Colombia. The drug routes, there were many, but the big one was through the Caribbean, where Carlos later controlled an island in the Bahamas that became, if you've seen Blow, the movie Blow, that's kind of profiled in that particular movie. And so, at that time, Customs controlled a lot of blimps that were doing radar. Of course, they had Customs air enforcement, so they had the type of aircraft that could intercept, and they would work in conjunction with DEA. They had the go-fast boats that could intercept, and again, they would be working in conjunction with DEA most of the time. And they had the responsibility of trying to manage the risk that came through the legal ports, through freighters. And, in the Tampa Bay area, one of the biggest importers of bananas from Colombia, they had constantly in Port Manatee and in the Port of Tampa, they had those vessels coming in. And so there would be often times where there'd be seizures of drugs off of those bulk freighters that would be coming in. But they recognized the importance of the money side. And again, getting to command and control by prosecuting the owners of the money. And in order to do that, you really need to go after the facilitators. And the facilitators are the bankers, the lawyers, the financial service providers, corrupt businessmen who facilitate the laundering of literally trillions of dollars a year around the globe. So they became our target in Operation Greenback. The people that were handling the greenbacks, that were moving and cleaning the money, and our principal targets were attempting to identify and prosecute the primary money launderers that were servicing the Medellin cartel.
One of the things that I find interesting is the fact that you choose to go after the money that it's almost easier to shut down the money. Why wouldn't it be easier to just shut down the borders and just say, look, instead of going after the money, we're going to tighten up these borders. We know what's coming across. We're going to stop any cocaine that's coming across on the borders. Why is it easier to go after the money, Robert, as opposed to just shutting down the borders?
Well, you can't shut the border down. We shut the border down one time, um, and that was vehemently opposed, although it was the right thing to do. When that was done in 1985, during the Reagan administration, when the Secretary of the Treasury didn't want the border shut down, but the Commissioner of Customs, his last name was Van Rob, decided that it was the appropriate thing to do because a DEA agent, Enrique Kiki Camarena, had been kidnapped by a Mexican cartel and was at the time missing in action. No doubt he was being tortured. There was no real serious help by Mexican authorities. And so they shut the border down, which, that shuts down commerce
Yeah.
between the two nations, which is extremely important to those who live in the legal world in both nations. And so it's not something you can do lightly, just shut the border down. So it's one of the many weapons following the money. It's one of the many weapons that can be used and was used for the purposes of going after those involved in the command and control of these criminal organizations. Unfortunately, Kiki was tortured for many days. They had a doctor there who kept him awake for 48 hours while they tortured him in unspeakable terms. That was recorded, and the recordings of that torture were obtained by DEA and have never been disclosed. He was later smashed in the head with a tire iron and then buried in a shallow grave on a property that Rafael Caro Cantero controlled, and he was charged with being the major mastermind behind Kiki's kidnapping and torture. And it's hard to imagine that since 1985, we just this year have been able to get him extradited to the United States for prosecution. Due to significant corruption within Mexico, they said that they wanted to prosecute him. They put him in a prison that was basically a palace. He ran his criminal organization from there with better amenities than the Ritz-Carlton. And then ultimately, he was released when corruption again hit, and he was let out the door because of some alleged technicality, and it took decades to get him back again. So, but anyway, it's not a light, it's not an easy thing to do to shut down a legal border between two nations that are allies and rely so heavily on trade with one another.
So you just mentioned, what happened to Kiki. Now, if someone come to me, if I was working at U.S. Customs and they said, "Hey, Scott, would you like to go undercover?" I'd probably say, "Hey, you know what? I'm good behind a computer. I'm going to use I'll sit behind this laptop and we'll figure, I'll look at bank statements and follow the cash and all this sort of stuff. I'm good with where I am." Now, they would have came to you, Robert, at one point and said, "Robert, would you like to go undercover?" You certainly didn't say, "I'll stick behind a computer. I'm going to go into the tip of the spear and go into this." What was your thinking? Like, is this something? Is it something that you'd always wanted to do? You must be, again, very passionate about trying to stop the drug trade. But maybe just take us through that, because I can imagine it's obviously not a decision as well. It just affects you. It also affects your family. That's another. There's a lot of folks that would be involved in this decision making process. Um, Give us some insight into that decision making, into how that kind of went for you.
Yes, well, doing undercover work within any law enforcement agency, and certainly within the law enforcement agencies that I was in, requires volunteering. They don't come to you and ask you to do it.
I see.
They may make a suggestion that because of one or another talents is that you have, that you might be the type of individual who would fit well into a particular type of undercover role. But in my case, we were working on Operation Greenback and using traditional methods and, developing informants and busting doors down and uh, subpoenaing records and all the things that you normally do. And at best, we had mediocre success. So we realized we needed a new tool in our toolbox, and that had to be the long-term undercover technique. So I volunteered because I recognized that in order to be credible as a money launderer, number one, you've got to have a business background. You've got to be able to know how to read books and records. You've got to be able to handle books and records, because if you make a mistake, they don't care whether it was a mistake or you intentionally stole money, you're dead. So having a business administration finance background, having worked in a bank, worked in a brokerage firm, none of my colleagues had that background. They had more traditional criminal justice majors, former local law enforcement officers, and in order for us to be able to do this, we needed to have a very good plan, and we need to have agents that were very well backstopped and qualified to do the roles. And so the first thing is you volunteer. Then you get psychologically profiled, and somehow or another I slipped through that and was picked as a candidate to go through the undercover schools. And then you go through the undercover school, and it's run by people who are involved in training, but also former law enforcement officers. Law enforcement officers who formerly did long-term undercover, and psychologists. And I was blessed. I had, first of all, leadership that recognized that long-term undercover is not a sport; it's a science, and you shouldn't mess around with that unless you've got well-qualified people, well prepared, who are supported to the degree they need to be in order for you to reasonably succeed. And I had, as one of my mentors in training, a guy who became very well known as a former long-term undercover agent with the FBI, who played the role of Donnie Brasco, Joe Pistone, who became a very good friend of mine, has been my mentor for many decades, and really was extraordinarily helpful in developing me. So, and many, many other long-term undercover agents. So after getting through the undercover schools, and there's an array of things that you are taught in the undercover schools, not just, how to backstop yourself, how to put businesses together, how to do the things you need to do to appear to be the persona that you are claiming to be, but how to identify your targets, how to put your methodologies together, what resources you need, what approvals you need. There's many, many different things that you have to learn. So after having gone through that, that's when I started for about a year and a half to put together the persona of Robert Mazur. I was blessed with a leader who recognized that you can't do that overnight. I knew I couldn't do it overnight if it was going to be right. I had a lot of resources at that time from my law enforcement career, which by then was probably 12 plus years. So a lot of people in banks that I got to know who would be able to help me to set this up. A lot of people who are former criminals who would help me to be able to set this up. And a lot of people who were what I would just call good citizens, who were business people who had the resources that enabled me to put this persona together. And once it was together, that's when I put the plan together. And the plan, again, I was blessed. I had a partner, more of a street guy, Amir Abreu, much better undercover agent than I'll ever be. Amir walks into a room. He's just a streetsy guy. People don't wonder if he's an agent. They wonder what kind of crime he commits, because he's just a natural. He's an absolute natural. And he's bilingual, spoke fluent Spanish. He took the position of the manager of my street guys in my mythical criminal organization. And the plan was for us to play hard to get. So for the first 6 months, Amir would tell them, hey, and he would be introduced through, there was an informant we had in Colombia who knew people who were in lower levels of the Medellin cartel, who were money launderers, who didn't have the resources that they needed to launder, but had great contacts, went to high school with members of the Medellin cartel. They needed really quality money laundering assets. They had plenty of money, but they didn't have enough resources to launder it. So Amir said, well, I've got these few accounts my boss set up. Thanks to him, he works for his own family, not meaning a blood family, but in New York. And if you could ever get him to come out of the shadows, you could launder all the money in the world, but he's got a primary responsibility to his family. And so he doesn't want to be known, doesn't ever want to meet any of you. He's given me the responsibility, but I can only handle small amounts given what I'm doing. So after 6 months, they were knocking the door down, wanting to meet me. And eventually I did meet them. So at that stage, I went from being the case agent, managing everything from behind the scenes, turned that over to another case agent. And then I took the primary undercover role as the Mr. Big, so to speak. But by then, my backstop was totally set up. I was an Italian. And this is important. When you set up your long-term backstopping, you want to use as much of the natural abilities that you have to be infused into this persona that you're going to be. If you're going to be an 18-wheeler truck driver, you better be an 18-wheeler truck driver and be damn good at it. In my case, I was embedded in real businesses, an investment company in Florida, a mortgage brokerage business, a jewelry chain with 30 locations on the East Coast. We had an air charter service with a private jet that went from Florida to the Bahamas. And then in addition to that, I was embedded in a real brokerage firm that had a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. So I didn't have to be the best undercover agent in the world. Blessed with leadership, gave me the education on how to do this, gave me the resources and the time to put it together, and supported me through the operation. So I had a lot of assets that worked on my behalf to be able to pull off what we pulled off.
And maybe just give us some perspective here, Robert. You certainly appreciate this when you read your books, is the intelligence level of the bad guys. I think for somebody just coming in, let's say like myself, before we get in and read your books and things like that, we might assume that, the quote unquote bad guys, the cartels, these are, uneducated folks who easy to pull the wool over their eyes, and you'll be able to get away from stuff. But really that couldn't be further from the truth, is that these are highly, highly educated people that you're, going up against. And it is incredibly important that every aspect of your backstory, every aspect of how you interact with them is constantly being analyzed, and you're always under pressure. Is that a fair representation in terms of, who you're really going up against when you walk into this undercover role?
That's a very fair representation. The highest level person in the Medellin cartel with whom I had face-to-face dealings is an attorney by the name of Santiago Uribe, who was to the rest of the world, he was a professor at the University of Medellin. He had a law practice, and he dealt a lot with the senators in Colombia. He, in reality, was the principal consigliere for Pablo Escobar and his primary attorney. And the reason that he dealt with the legislature is that, at least best estimates from law enforcement, is about 80% of the senators were being paid off by Escobar, and he was the payman who would have the principal amount of dealing with them. But there were other people that were very high up. Gerardo Moncada was the right-hand man of Pablo Escobar, a college-educated engineer. He and another client of mine, a guy by the name of Fernando Galeano, these two guys are featured in the last two episodes of year one of Narcos and spoken about in their real names. And they, between the two of them, Moncada and Galeano, they managed 100% of the routes. At that time, Pablo was so busy with the war against Colombia and with other issues that he delegated a lot and basically made his money by issuing war taxes against those who were in the senior management. And so, as people do, I mean, those taxes started off at 200,000 a month, went to $1 million a month, and as anybody does who gets taxed more than they feel they should, some people, unfortunately for Moncada and Galliano, they were suspected to be evading some of the taxes, and about $22 million was found in what they call a coletta. It's a hole dug in a house that they jointly owned. It was like $22 million in cash that was in there. And when Escobar found out about this, by this time he was in what was called the Cathedral, his self-made jail, which was really a palace. And he had them summoned there. They were confronted. Galliano's a hothead, got into an argument. Now it was in Escobar's eyes his responsibility to make sure that they were made examples of. So after torturing for a while, they ultimately had them, according to one witness who was there, I wasn't there, had them hung by their feet. They stripped their clothes off. They melted the skin off their bodies with blowtorches. Then they chopped them up in little pieces and then burned them into ash. And no one has ever found Galliano and Moncada. Members of their blood families were kidnapped and brought there and beheaded. And people who worked for Moncada and Galliano that they could get their hands on, again, were brought there and beheaded. Their assets were all taken by Escobar. Estimates were like $500 million of Moncada's money. Of course, they know who the people's accountants are, so they'd grab their accountants and torture them to find out where all the money was. And eventually, the spouses, especially Moncada's wife, became so upset about what had happened with this internal cleansing that she was convinced by another member of Moncada's group to cooperate and became a cooperator with DEA and with the Colombian National Police. But she also, allegedly, and as along with other people from Moncada's that survived, funded Los Pepes, the vigilante group that then went after Escobar, and with the help of law enforcement and intelligence agencies, ultimately chased him down. And I think it was December of '93 when he was killed.
Yeah, Narcos is a fantastic show. It's and another question I have, from that really stuck out to me, watching Narcos is taking a look at Pablo Escobar. He'd wear, in some cases, he'd wear these sweaters with like a picture of like a cow on it, or like a pig, like almost like a child's sweater. And I think he had a daughter and a son and a wife. And for the outside looking in, now again, I don't know how accurate Narcos is when it comes to this, but he'd actually look like a pretty good father. A decent husband. Obviously, I think he had something on the side, but again, certainly the way he interacted with his kids was, he looked to be a good father. And that's on one side. And on the second side, he'll put a bomb in an airplane and kill hundreds of people almost overnight with almost no reaction. Like that, and I can imagine that sort of characteristic, that duality in personality, it would exist in several of these folks that you're dealing with. Where do you think that comes from, Robert? Do you think you're born like that, or do you think that is just because of the environment that he grows up in, that is just part of how that personality builds out? Because those two extremes are stunning to me, that somebody can be hugging and kissing and comforting their children in one scenario, and then you just talked about what they did with those two folks, but also blowing up a passenger airplane on the other hand.
Well, I'm narcissist and sociopath, and even
Yeah.
Hitler had a girlfriend and a personal life.
Yep.
So, and you have to recognize that these people are people. That's part of your job as a long-term undercover agent, and that is to find a way to appeal to them in more than just a business sense. The business sense is extraordinarily important. You've got to have something that they want that they don't have. But at the same time, it certainly facilitates your interaction with them if you use the tools that are there for the purposes of enhancing your rapport and ability to communicate, your ability to establish rapport and to enhance communication. I did that with every single target that I dealt with, other than there was one target that I I didn't get along with. And people in life, that's life. But what I did do is I used another undercover technique in order to break that down, which is really an undercover technique that you can take from the administration of Abraham Lincoln. That is taking your adversaries and making them allies by creating a scenario where their success is based upon, or your success is based upon their success. I mean, he took his major political rivals and put them in charge of departments within the United States administrations, and in order to neutralize that problem. And that's the technique I used with one particular guy. But you know, when you get into this, you have to realize that it's not enough to be someone, and it certainly helps. It's not enough to be a person who looks like and appears to have carry themselves in a way where they may be successful and undercover. That's like jumping into the deep end of a pool, despite the fact that you don't know how to swim, because you're going to drown. And no matter how talented you are, you cannot be arrogant and not study the science of long-term undercover. I mean, it starts in the movie The Infiltrator. They portrayed the relationship between me and a major transporter of cocaine for the Medellin cartel, a guy by the name of Roberto El Cayeno. And with respect to Roberto, before I met him, I already knew he had been the subject of major task force investigations for years. So there was a pool of information about his background. And I needed to care enough about my success with this target to do my homework. There isn't anything about his likes and dislikes that that wasn't an asset for me to know before I met him. I mean, I knew that he's an Argentinian Sicilian. He's got an apartment in New York. He's got a wife. He's got 2 kids. He enjoys wines. He's a guy who enjoys art. Chagall was like one of the artists that he had paintings from. And most importantly, he had a jewelry store, and he was a guy who collected Rolls Royces. Well, the first time he came to, quote, my house, which was actually the home of a guy I formerly prosecuted who became an informant of mine, who was at one time a bodyguard for a capo in an Italian-American organized crime family. So now that house is my house. But in the garage, I had a Rolls Royce parked. And we went in through the garage. I didn't say anything. He saw it, immediately turned over to it. At the time, I learned as much as I possibly could about that Rolls Royce and other Rolls Royces. And so now we had things in common.
Yeah.
He was a jeweler. Eventually, because he was stalling about really doing big business with me, and I asked my informant, the former capo, said, this guy's telling me we're going to do big business. I know he's moving thousands of kilos at a time. There's tens of millions of dollars a week that have to be moved, and I'm seeing maybe 250 grand a week, and that's chicken feed. So, if you got somebody who says that you're going to be partners and then this happens, what do you do? And then the guy goes to me, well, you got to give him a gift the next time he blesses the relationship. And I said, well, okay, the government's going to give me enough money to give him like a 19-inch black and white TV, and that ain't going to work. And he goes, well, let me show you. So he walked into the walk-in safe that was in his bedroom and comes back with a small paisley cloth covered jewelry box and opens it up. and it's the stunning cross, solid gold, quarter-inch thick bars studded with diamonds. And he goes, it's worth 25 G's. And I said, well, he goes, why don't you guys just borrow it from me? He sees it back from him at the end. And I go, well, we got to do things a little more formally than just you hand it to me and I do something with it. No, that's not happening. So I went to my boss, who by then I knew for a long time. And I just said, Paul, we got to figure out a way to be able to do this by the numbers. Now, this guy isn't going to get paid. The informant's not going to get paid in the case. He didn't ask to be paid in the case. If we can't get this back, can we put him in for a $25,000 reward? So he's even. And how about if I write up this loan document where he's going to loan it to us to use as a prop in the undercover operation, and we'll give it back to him at the end. And if it's not available because it got lost or seized, as long as that can be legitimately proven, we'll put him in for the 25 grand. And so he signed off on it. And now I've got this diamond $25,000 cross. So on an occasion when Roberto came to visit me in Florida, we went back to New York on my private jet. It was a Cessna 2, and landed at Teterboro Airport. And there's a limo down at the base of the stairs. We get in that, go over to the brokerage firm. I introduce him to some of my contacts there. There was actually another informant who was the only person there that knew who I was. And so this is before 9/11, so we could take people on the floor of the stock exchange because we had a seat. And so I take Roberto on the floor of the stock exchange, and then after that, we went to a social club, and then after that, we're in the limo. I take him back to his apartment right by the UN. He gets ready to get out, and I get the door just before it closes, and I get out there with him, and I go, listen, we're doing, are we or are we not partners? Yes. No, we are, compadre, for sure. I said, okay, so we're in business together. We are completely committed to one another. We are, Roberto, you know what this business is like. When I have a partner, I'm willing to die for my partner. Are you? Oh, yes, I am. Okay, well, that being the case, my family has a tradition to give a gift when we become soul brothers. And here for you is my gift. And he's a jeweler. He's a high-end jeweler. He opens it up. He immediately knows this thing's worth a lot of money. That changed the whole thing right around. But I had to know that he was a jeweler. I had to know that he's religious. And because, if he's a guy who doesn't value religion at all, that wouldn't have been the right gift, for him to be getting. So, it's all part of a process in order for you to develop and enhance rapport, earn trust, use passive reinforcements to get people to believe you are who you say you are without you saying who you are, neutralizing obstructions. And, at the same time, you have to train to be the best you can possibly be, because you're living two lives and you're getting very little sleep. And you've got to work with the bad guys, but you've got to, from an evidentiary standpoint, you've got to process evidence. You've got to be able to write reports. You've got to be able to do all these things that you need to do. And if you're not at your best, if you're not working out, if you're not eating right, if you're not getting as much sleep as you possibly can, you begin to break down. And then you are more prone to make mistakes. And a mistake could be the last thing that you ever do. So it's very, very important. It was important for me. There are probably people out there that are absolute naturals that don't need to be trained. But I knew I needed to be trained, and I considered it an obligation to my agency, to the public that I serve, and to my family, so that I'd come home. And so that's the approach that I took to it.
You mentioned the movie The Infiltrator. Do you think The Infiltrator appropriately captured how things actually went down? I realize they've got to embellish that, it's a movie, whatever it is, 90 minutes. You can't get through everything. But were you happy with the finished product in terms of giving people an insight into what that life was really like?
Yeah, there were many things that I felt very strongly about that were done extremely well. How could you not feel that way when a brilliant actor and person like Brian Cranston plays you in a film? That I think was fortunate. John Leguizamo, Benjamin Bratt, Diane Kruger. I mean, that was an all-star cast. And I think that they were all extraordinarily talented people. I would say 25% of what's in the movie, either didn't happen or happened in a different way.
Yeah.
But some of it was pretty much right on. I mean, some people might find it hard to imagine, but that scene where I went to a Santeria priest really happened. Now, there
Wow.
was not a guy who got shot in the head next to me. That was embellishment by Hollywood, but we were getting into the last 4 months, 5 months of the operation, and one of the people who was close to Roberto Alcaino and close to one of the Medellin cartel leaders, his wife was the niece of Rodriguez Gacha, who was a sitting member on the board of the Medellin cartel, and he was a practicing he practiced Santeria. So his test to me, among others, he said to me, Bob, I'm ready to really get involved, but I need you to meet my priest, and he needs to feel your soul and give me guidance as to whether or not we're really going to do business together. So I let everybody back in the office know that, because I would every night or every other night, I'd be at the payphones at 1 o'clock in the morning, calling the prosecutor, the case agent. Um, I'd be mostly in Miami, but I might be in New York or LA, and I would be telling them what it is that was going on. And I said, he wants me to see the Santeria priest, so what choice do we have? If I say no, then that's going to raise a lot of suspicions. And they said, well, no, no, no. What if he says no and then he spreads the word? And I said, well, you know what? We're not supposed. This is a very important element of a long-term undercover operation. You need to recognize when it's time to take the case down. Take the case down. What you need to do is you need to be able, if you're not meeting new bad guys and you're not uncovering new crimes, and you're dealing with the same people and the same crimes, it's time to stop because you're facilitating crime. Now, especially as a money launderer, you're pumping blood into the heart of the cartel. So what I decided I was going to go. At this stage, I had a disease called information is my heroin. I had to get the next best thing. I mean, you got to realize I'm getting information. We're seizing thousands of pounds of cocaine. We're seizing millions of dollars. At the same time, I'm dealing with these guys. I'm dealing with a bank that works with them, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, the seventh largest privately held bank in the world. And I'm dealing with senior bank executives, including a board member, that are orchestrating the laundering of money from just about every illegal source you can imagine. And so I'm getting information from them. For example, my financial advisor was the financial advisor to Manuel Noriega. From the cartel and from them, I knew Noriega was being paid tens of millions of dollars by the cartel to allow his country to be used to move drugs and money. And so I'm getting information like that every day. And now at this stage, well, if I want to get more information, my heroine, I've got to go through with this meeting. What I didn't do that I should have done, because I should have been more tactical, is I should have known, I knew the address, but I didn't check the house out beforehand or have anybody else check the house out. So I walk into the house, me, the bad guy, and presumably the only person there is going to be Padron, the Godfather. And once we walk in, and behind him, the gate closes, and I find out that I'm in a birdcage because they've got burglar bars on every window and every door. So
Wow.
once that door closed, there's no way out. And so eventually he goes into this room. He leaves me in the living room to wait. he comes out. He tells me to come in. I come in. I'm in this room that's been converted into an altar for the Santeria priest. There's blood on the ground. There's candles burning. There's figurines. There's all that good stuff. And so this priest comes over to me and puts his hands on my shoulders and stares into my face, doesn't say anything. Then after, a minute, which seemed like a half hour, the trafficker says, go outside and wait. He's there. Eventually he comes out, big smiles. Padrino says, you're a good and honorable man, so we'll do business. And Padrino was right, because I was a good and honorable man to the government, just not to them. So that was embellished. I mean, they made the Santeria priest look like a Green Bay Packer middle linebacker. He was really more about the size of Danny DeVito, and the room was similar, but they had somebody getting shot in the head, but there was nobody that got shot in the head. So, I mean, it was true, but it was embellished.
There's one scene in that movie I wanted to ask you about. It was probably my favorite scene in the entire movie. And I think what I had realized afterwards is that it actually didn't happen. But I think the way it was portrayed in the movie was really interesting. Now, this was the one where you were out for dinner with your wife to celebrate your anniversary at a fancy restaurant. The waiter comes and says, "Yeah, I'll get you a cake for your for your anniversary." And the waiter goes away. And then what happens is you run into one of the bad guys, and you invite him to sit down, and all of a sudden the two worlds come crashing together. The undercover world with your real life, with obviously your wife sitting next to you. And when the waiter comes back, he says, "Here's your anniversary cake," and you say to him, "What are you talking about? This isn't my anniversary. This is my secretary here, and we're here to celebrate my birthday." And basically, you go absolutely bananas, and your wife, aka your secretary, is absolutely horrified by what she sees. And I thought it was a very interesting scene, because it really shows again the duality of the role, the complete opposite of the life that you're living. In one case, again, you're a loving husband, you're a father to two kids on one side. That's kind of your night job, and then your day job is again as a money launderer for these cartels, and it all comes crashing together in this scene. That's how I saw it. I thought it was really interesting. Just want to get your take on that scene. Did it actually happen or not? And did anything even close to that ever happen in real life that didn't happen?
One, it didn't happen. Two, it is an extrapolation from something I discussed with the director, Brad Furman, about an issue that you need to watch out for within an undercover agent, and that is role reversal. That is latching on to portions of your undercover persona that you enjoy so much that you allow it to creep into your life. To be at a restaurant where it was even possible to run into one of the bad guys is not smart. But in real life, I did experience, and after I did experience this, I realized that I did, and did my best not to let it happen again. But I'm from New York originally. So, and New York was my undercover world. And by this time, I was a member of private clubs. Regine's was one that I went to a lot. I mean, that's a place where all the beautiful people hung out. When I was there, Gloria Estefan would be there, or, all the major baseball players, and so would the drug dealers, and Roberto El Cayeno I would bring to Regine's. So, and Roberto had a favorite restaurant in Little Italy called Il Cortile, which is still there. And so he and I would have dinner there occasionally. So now it's time for my high school reunion. And my buddy, who's a banker and was part of setting up my backstopping, got a Rolls Royce for us for the high school reunion. And after the reunion on Staten Island, what do? We go in the Rolls Royce, and I go, okay, if anybody comes over and while we're together, don't call me anything but Bob. And if anybody comes over that you don't know, don't say anything.
Do they know what you do, Robert, though? Like, do
Yeah.
they, like, it's one thing to say that. Do they know that you're undercover with the cartels? And if they actually call you something other than Bob, it's going to be a problem?
Yeah, because this is a banker who helped set up my,
Okay. Yeah.
part of my false ID.
Got it.
My wife certainly knows because my wife was my back, she was she watched my back the whole time. So we go and so now what do? I take him to Regine's. Thank God, Roberto wasn't there. Then where do we go to dinner? Il Cortile. And afterward, now I was flying. After that, I left. The next morning, I left. I had to go to Europe for meetings with bad guys. And on that long flight, I started putting two to two together about role reversal and the training that I'd gotten and recognized that I had just committed a cardinal sin. And so, in a sense, it was a takeoff, on that role reversal problem. Uh, my wife was smarter than me, is smarter than me. So we got into the last 4 or 5 months of the operation, and I would come home maybe a day and a half every month. And clearly, when you're an undercover agent, you don't realize that your family makes adjustments while you're gone. Mom is now mom and dad. Your position is different in the eyes of the kids. And my wife eventually said, the day to day and a half that you're here is torture.
Yeah.
So let's do this. Don't come home until it's over. And when you do, we'll determine whether or not we'll continue to have a life together. And that was a good thing that we did that because it was only going to get worse as far as the problems go. I mean, I had phone security, had set up a phone in the closet of my bedroom at home where we could, without worry of tracing by the bad guys, enable my phone in my home to ring in my real home. And there was a strobe light in the living room so that no matter where you were in the house, when the strobe light went off, you knew that that was the undercover phone. Everybody knew to be quiet, and I could go into the closet and answer the phone. I mean, unfortunately, I was home for Thanksgiving dinner. My mom and dad were there, my brother, his family, me, my wife, my kids. At the table, my dad gets done saying grace, and the strobe light goes off. I leave, and I come back, 20 minutes later, and you could hear a pin drop, because it's just not normal. But in order to try to not lose a portion of my real self, those times for a period of time were important to me. Luckily, the ideal situation for a long-term undercover is to have as much roots as possible. I had very deep roots. My dad fought in World War II in Africa, Italy, and France. My brother fought in Vietnam after he graduated college. They were patriots. This was my opportunity to do my patriotic duty. Your wife should have her own profession. My wife was an educator, a very busy time. My kids competed on a national level in gymnastics, very time consuming for my wife as well. People were very busy. If I had a wife I'd newly married who had a baby at home and no profession, and I went through the undercover assignment I did, we'd be divorced. My wife and I started dating. She was a sophomore. I was a senior in high school. Other than the year and a half she dumped me when I was in college, we've been best friends. And that meant a lot. My parents meant a lot. Service to country meant a lot. Training meant a lot. Um, I was blessed with a lot of support. I could have crashed and burned very easily. Without that support, you will.
Yeah, well, the other your wife is a special person to be able to deal with all of that, because what we haven't mentioned either, and again, you appreciate this in the movie especially and in the book, is the fact that, again, not only were you undercover, you were undercover with a significant other, and it was all leading up to a marriage. Like I can just imagine, you come home for that day and a half or whatever, and then it's like, well, where are you going? Well, going out to party all week and, be with my girlfriend that I'm gonna marry. Like, how was your wife able to kind of compartmentalize that and just say, look, like, this is his work. This isn't his personal not his personal life, and this is just a temporary thing. Because again, there's a really cool part in the movie where your undercover wife meets your real wife and they have a conversation. Again, that was another very powerful scene in the movie. Again, these two worlds colliding together.
Well, one of the scenes that's in the film that's pretty close to actual real is when I'm with Emir and Gonzalo Mora. Emir, my partner, and Gonzalo Mora, who's a money broker for the Medellin cartel. And we're in a strip club. And you've got to be prepared. People are going to try to compromise you. I was totally prepared for the anytime, although it never happened, somebody might try to convince me that I needed to snort a line of coke. My position was, you don't understand. You guys are the cherry on the cake. My bread and butter is taking care of my family and laundering money.
Would you be able, would you have been allowed to do that, Robert, or would that have been crossing the line if you were to do a lot of coke?
That would have been crossing the line. Let's not forget that ultimately what's most important here is going to be your appearing in a courtroom, in a Florida courtroom, and the demographics of the jury is going to be some older folks that are going to be there. And you better be prepared to say, you've got to tell the truth. And you better be prepared not to say or do things that are going to cause them to not accept you as a credible person. I don't see how you could possibly say that snorting a line of coke was something you had to do. Now, if somebody had a gun to my head, yeah, I guess I probably would. But, the typical thing for me was easy of like, listen, if my people ever found out, I handle millions and millions of dollars for them. It's like, do you really want your doctor to be a cokehead? They don't want their accountant to be a cokehead. And if they find out that I am, they're going to kill me. So I'm sorry, your business isn't worth it. And so that was easy, but I wasn't expecting Gonzalo Moro to, as in the movie he did, comes up to me with, he's got one arm, he's got a stripper in one arm and a stripper in the other arm. And he goes, Mr. Bob, this is for you up in the private room. So my head's spinning. And so I said, well, Gonzalo, let me speak with you. I said, listen, at the time I was 36. I said, I'm 36 years old. I'm an Italian American. I've never been married. My mom wants grandkids. I've just gotten engaged. And I'm not going to F this up. So if my going with this woman is that important to you, business is over, buddy. Now, I've also got another asset here, and that is he doesn't have the capabilities to handle 6 figures at a time, 7 figures at a time. He can handle 50,000 a week, but he can't handle that. So is he going to say no to me? No, obviously not. And I thanked him, and I told him it was very thoughtful and blah, 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 blah. So, but now we have to have a female agent. So they picked somebody from Miami who came over, and she started doing some cameos, but she wound up being accepted well by a lot of the bad guys. So she wound up having more of a presence than what I first thought would be the case. But obviously, in a social setting, occasionally she needed to be there because, their wives were there, their kids were there. I mean, you've got to have a personal life. I mean, if you think you're going to just deal with somebody on a business level um, and succeed, no, Gonzalo Moore is not my main target. Gonzalo Moore is a stepping stone. He's a step in the ladder. And the three people after him are steps in the ladder. I need to get up the steps. And so I need to establish rapport as best I can with as many of these people as I can. So yeah, my wife is a hero in this thing. And she's had my back all my life, and she still has my back. And, you know, um, I can honestly say that we have never as a couple been more challenged than we were through this experience. The subsequent long-term undercover operation was less of a stress, but in that one, there was a female agent playing the role of my active wife. And again, some people would say, "Oh," one of my bosses once said one time, "Well," I said, the government's only providing this crappy apartment. I mean, for a meeting place for us. But I've got informants, and I can work this out, and I'm going to get us the right kind of housing that we need here. But um, if I want to go to their house, which I do, how am I going to say, because they would say, well, just tell them you don't want them to come to your house, that you have to use this safe house. I go, "Yeah, that's really going to get me in solid with them. Sure, you can't come to my house, but I'd really like to come to your house." No, it doesn't work that way. I'd like to get to know your family, but I don't have a family, and I'm not going to let you meet my family. And no, it doesn't work. That humans don't don't develop a relationship if one of them is closed armed and the other one is looking to learn everything they can about the other person. So, it's a necessity.
So we could run a whole podcast episode on how you actually manage to prosecute these folks, because that is a whole science in of itself. The movie obviously doesn't touch on that other than providing some credits at the end. Those credits at the end are probably supported by hours and days and weeks of of testimony and evidence, as you kind of get to in your book. But everything comes to everything comes to conclusion. What I don't understand, Robert, is then your exit from customs into DEA. Why wasn't that a clean exit? Again, what I just don't get is that, if they were to rank the top 5 undercover U.S. custom agents in their history, you're probably on that list. You're probably one of the Hall of Famers. Um, why wasn't that a nice clean exit? Why is it so hard to kind of leave and join another government organization like the DEA?
Well, first off, your question about trial and preparing. Everything that you do prior to the time of the arrest means nothing unless you succeed in a courtroom. As I always used to tell my managers, who are short-minded at times, and it's just a natural agency thing, the work starts after the arrest. They think the work is over after the arrest because they think, well, now the prosecutor's going to be taking over. Well, the prosecutor can't do anything unless the evidence is properly processed, unless you're properly prepared, and unless you testify properly. I testified in many trials in the U.S. and in the U.K., and the longest trial, one in Tampa, was 6 months long. And in that trial, I got on the witness stand in the middle of March, and I got off in the middle of June. I testified every single court day for 3 months. And
Wow.
I knew that whoever knew the recordings, there were 1,200 recordings, whoever knew the contents of the recordings best was going to win. Because there are always things that come up that can be twisted in its appearance by a very gifted lawyer, which these guys were all very gifted. And so you've got to be fully prepared for that. And I do training for law enforcement officers about defense tactics and undercover operations, how to prepare for trial, all those types of things. Got to remember, life's a bell curve. So I don't think that there's any big evil conspiracy in agencies to have things go bouncy. For me, the personal story of what created bounciness here was, in June of a given year, I'm told the undercover operation is going to end in October. And I go, wait a minute. I wrote the undercover operational plan. The operational plan is that we have meetings once a month. We review, are we meeting new bad guys? Are we finding new evidence, crimes? And if we are, we stay. If we not, we end. What is the big deal about October? Not too many people would say much. What I ultimately came to learn from some of the other people who would know better, because they were at meetings in Washington, is that the then head of customs, who was a very good head of customs, customs commissioner, Von Raab. Von Raab wanted to become the first drug czar. Another guy who worked as the head of the Office of Enforcement wanted to become the commissioner. The guy who, the lady who was my boss in Tampa wanted to become the head of enforcement. I think it was more perceived by them than it was a mandate by anybody else. But the fact of the matter is, there was testimony that was taken that this was perceived by the Republican administration to be an important case to end in October. It would be the, quote, October surprise, helping the country to understand that this administration was tough on drugs and money, and that this was an administration that could excel in the war on drugs. And so that really irked me, to say the least. At the same time, there was a prosecution being handled by the district attorney's office in New York, Morgenthau, following up on the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. We had now just arrested probably 10 or 12 senior execs, did search warrants in London, Paris, and in Miami, maybe Panama. Oh, no, I don't think it was in Panama. But anyway, at least 3. So we had all these records. They wanted to really go forward. Morgenthau's office wanted to really go forward on aggressively going after the Bank of Credit and Commerce International that had a significant branch in New York. So investigators came down from the New York DA's office, and someone tried to convince everybody in our office that we should not volunteer evidence that would be helpful to them. And I didn't say anything. In my own mind, I did. And excuse my French, but I said bullshit. So I sat down with the prosecutor and the investigator, and I said, this here is going to be extraordinarily important to you. This is how we have this organized, this, and this. And I told them everything that I know. That was not perceived well. It was also now important for the word got out that, and at this time, U.S. Senator Kerry was handling an investigation that related to the crimes of Manuel Noriega and the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. They wanted me to testify. The Customs didn't want me to testify, didn't want anybody to testify. We're going to use the excuse that there's trials pending, investigations pending. This can't be done. Eventually, I got a phone call from an aide of Senator Nunn of Georgia, who was a former prosecutor in Tampa and knew me, who said, you need to know this, Bob. Their Customs is going to try to blame you for their ending the case in October. they're going to say that you lost it, that they were worried that you were going off the rails, and blah 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 blah. So I sat down with my then supervisor, and I said, "This is pretty credible information. This is what they're going to do." That supervisor and another supervisor and the assistant special agent in charge said, "We'll tell the truth. We'll back you in. We don't care what they want to do." Eventually, I testified. I testified before the subcommittee. I later learned, oh, this was another thing that they did. So, yeah, they wanted me, when the case went down, they wanted me to actually go through with a wedding. And I said, you guys are out of your mind. First of all, if you see the film, you'll know how dangerous that could have been. You've had spouses there, you had children there, guns. Oh, that's crazy. And so I find out at the last minute that these people had been talking to NBC for a month. I'm undercover for a month, the last month, the most dangerous time. And they're talking about this with people who are news people. These aren't people vetted with top secret clearances. And so when I was told what the plan was, I said, you don't understand. This is going to get very personal with them. And you're making it even more personal. You're going to have these people arrested in front of their children and their spouses? Are you crazy? Yeah. So one of the assistant special agent in charge who was backing me said, well, why don't we just impromptu say there's a bachelor party? And then we'll have these limos pick up everybody. We'll get the bad guys in separate limos. We'll have 2 or 3 other people in there, family and friends. There'll be agents. We'll get them to the arrest locations. They'll be arrested. We'll come back. We'll tell the spouses what happened, give them the opportunity to stay the night if they want, and then they can do whatever they want to do. They have to leave at that stage. So when I said that I wasn't going to do the wedding, imagine this. The special agent in charge calls my wife. Now, my wife was never contacted during the 2 years that I was in long-term undercover. She was never contacted by one person in my office to see how she was doing. Thank God, and another thing very important for the success of a long-term undercover agent, my brother, his wife, his kids, my dad, my mom, all lived in the same town with my wife and my kids. She had support. Yeah. She had her professional support and her family support. And to the extent that I could give her support through phone calls from payphones every second night or so, I did. So this customs senior exec calls my wife and goes, you really need to talk to Bob. He really needs to do things the way that we want him to do it. Because, if he doesn't, and this was something always said in customs about people who would get themselves in trouble. He and you guys could always be transferred to Pimina, North Dakota. My wife said, you know what? You can take this job and stick it where the sun doesn't shine. We don't need you. My husband can get a job somewhere else, and don't call me back. My wife's from New York. Her mom and dad were born in Puerto Rico. She's a hardcore New Yorker who grew up in the project. So you got to realize who you're dealing with here. But these things happen, unfortunately, because you have to understand, without people who are extraordinarily experienced leaders, it's easy for a bumpiness to establish between management and the undercover, because the undercover at times is going to want to do things, as I did at times, that are pushing the envelope. And you've got to bring them back in. Now, I was compromised, almost compromised, because my office insisted. I came back from Paris. I was there with Pablo Escobar's lawyer and 2 other very trusted people. And other people from the cartel were there. And we had worked out a deal. They bought off on my money laundering methodologies, and we got a contract for $100 million. And it was going to be $1 million say $1 million delivered in the morning, $2 million in the afternoon. That was going to go on several times a week. And we were going to be investing some of the money. We'd be moving some of the money back for them. And most of this money was going to be picked up in New York. I dread going anywhere near an office, government office, when I was in deep cover. But in this instance, the surveillance was going to be so important. I did. And I had been forewarned by Roberto Alcaino, Bob, the feds, keep this in mind and make sure you use counter surveillance. This is what they're going to look like. They're going to be gringos, white guys. They're going to be in their late 20s, early 30s. They're going to have jogging shoes, blue jeans, pullover solid shirts with collars, fanny packs. That's where their guns are. That's what you need to be looking for out there. So I get into the room where the surveillance guys are, and everybody's like in their late 20s, early 30s. They're all white guys. They got jeans, jogging shoes, and solid pullover shirts with collars and fanny packs. And I go, like, you're wearing the uniform they're looking for, guys. So now, if you ever have dealt with New Yorkers, by now, I went to school in Illinois. They made so much fun of me, I stopped saying Illinois, and I also stopped saying "yous guys." So they know I used to be from New York, and they go, listen, we're from New York. We've done this before. This is our rodeo. We're going to do things our way. Guess what? Counter surveillance was out there, and they saw them all. And Gerardo Moncada, in the background, when Gonzalo Mora called my partner, is screaming that Musella must be a DEA undercover agent. So now I got to figure out what I'm going to do. So I contacted a very good friend of Moncada's who I was dealing with, and I kind of got along pretty well with. And I said to him, I called him, I said, some bad things happen, and I need your help. Can we get together? Yeah, meet me. I'm in Miami, meet me. It's going to be like a midnight meeting at an airport motel, kind of a ratty place, bad area. So I call my contact agent, because I had a contact agent in each city. I would call them when I'm coming into their city, and they would manage security. So I said, listen, we can't have a cover team. If they pick up on surveillance while I'm there, I'm dead. So I'm going to this hotel. I'm going to be in this room. I've got my cell phone. I've got my pager. You can call me from an undercover phone. And if I say whatever, if I say the word handkerchief in a sentence, I got a problem. And you can come and get me. But if not, let me do my thing. So I go. I was supposed to bring some bank records. I left them in my car in a briefcase that had a recorder. I went in because I thought I was going to get shaken down. I get in. The only person there is this one guy, Rudy. So I sit down with Rudy. We start talking. He goes, well, where are the records? I go, oh, I left them in the car in my briefcase. Let me go get it. So now I've got the briefcase recorder running. I come back in. I put it on the bed, and he's doing a double take to the briefcase, like big time. And so now finally I got to open it up. He's sitting across from me at a table, so he can't see into the briefcase. He can only see the back of the briefcase. I open it up. I had told the office that the Velcro that held the recorder in the hidden compartment was failing at times. Please fix it. I open it up. It fails. The recorder falls down in the briefcase. Thank God he's on the other side. And now I got a bird's nest of wires. And now I'm trying to put it all back together without looking like my hair is on fire. He gets impatient. He gets up, comes around just as I get it back in.
Jesus.
And I told him during the thing, I go, Rudy, here's the deal, man. Like, we got another $96 million on this contract. I don't want a nickel of it. I'm not taking a penny from your people in New York again until we figure out where the problem is. And I need you to work with me so we find the problem. And if the problem's on my side, you have my assurances, I will eliminate the problem. If it's on your side, you need to eliminate the problem. We agreed on that. I said, you need to talk some sense into your boss, because I need your help to make sure that if there is a problem, we get rid of it. Not too many cops are going to say, I don't want your $96 million. And not many cops are, most cops are going to go like, oh, you're saying it's us. Well, we think it's you, and pound their chest, So again, that comes from the training and mentoring and all those other things and luck and a higher being looking out for me during the course of all this. So um, these things all happen not necessarily because there's some big plan to try to make my life miserable. It just boils down to individual rapport and responsibilities, and as my partner said, Amir, he goes, Bob, we can trust the bad guys more than we can trust the good guys.
It's that point comes across several times in your books, and it's certainly there's it certainly makes you it makes you think. Now to fast forward a little bit, the arrangement with U.S. Customs comes to a close, and then, which we could run a whole separate podcast episode on, is that you go basically through the whole thing all over again. And different spin on this is that you're ultimately betrayed, and it's all documented in your book. Which again, I would highly recommend that people take a read of. It just shows you the risk level. But maybe, Robert, the way I wanted to kind of, as we get close to wrap up here, is just give us some perspective on the drug issue today. In your second book, you talk about, some of the things that are required in order to fix this issue. Do you think things are better today than where it was, 30 or 40 years ago? Do you think we've come a long way, or is the drug problem as bad as ever?
The drug problem is worse than ever. But, as we as a society and as we as militaries and law enforcement, as we advance in our technologies and abilities, the cartels likewise advance. You have to recognize that corruption is the lifeblood of, and the most important product that the cartel spreads, organized crime spreads around the world. When I was in it, we had Manuel Noriega, who gave up Panama for the purposes of allowing it to be used to facilitate drug trafficking and money laundering. We had all types of leaders in African nations who were pilfering the assets of their countries. And I knew about it in great detail because BCCI had a lot of branches in North Africa, and I dealt with a board member who controlled those and branches in Europe. But, today, let's just look at, recent current events. It's maybe a year or so ago that we extradited the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Ortega. No, not Ortega. Anyway, the president of Honduras, his brother, Hernandez, that's his last name, Juan Orlando Hernandez. Tony Hernandez's brother, who was a former elected representative in Honduras, a room full of senators, all of them on the take, letting their country be used as a transshipment point for the Mexican cartels and the Colombian cartels, and establishing labs, coke labs, in Honduras itself. We had a situation in 2020 where DEA had identified a person who was only known as El Padrino, who was working with the H2 cartel in Mexico. And this individual was facilitating large movements of drugs and compromising somehow major law enforcement operations. And DEA finally ultimately got the evidence to arrest El Padrino in Los Angeles. And it turned out to be the former Secretary of Defense of Mexico.
Wow.
And what's worse about that case is, and his name is General Salvador Cienfuegos. What's worse about that case is after we arrested him, the country of Mexico and the president of Mexico was up in arms. If this is true, then we should prosecute him because the sovereignty of our nation is at hand. He should be prosecuted by us. Unfortunately, at the time, Bill Barr, as Attorney General, dismissed and agreed to have him removed back to Mexico, citing the claim that sensitive foreign policy considerations mandated that the case be dropped. So
Jeez.
now Cienfuegos is taken back to Mexico. And guess what? It takes them 30 days to say, it's disgusting. The Americans indicted him with no evidence whatsoever. There's no proof of any corruption by General Cienfuegos. And then just this year, they give him an award for enhancing the abilities of the military academy in Mexico. Now, when you have corruption at those lengths, now you know why it is that the cartels in Mexico have basically the same weaponry as the military. So they have drones that are armed with grenades, rocket-propelled grenades. They have drones that do surveillance on the border, drop drugs. They've got improvised explosive devices that they use to protect their areas, armored plated vehicles, night vision, heavy weapons, 50 caliber sniper rifles. They've got the most sophisticated spyware technology that's out there. They use facial recognition to be able to identify people. Like if you're going to be an undercover agent now, you better have everything about your face cleaned off the internet before you go out there, because they're going to do a sweep and they're going to find out whether or not you have that. But they have advanced AI databases. They have everything.
Yeah.
And it's now, our United Nations does not get along nearly as well as the United Nations of Organized Crime. The Chinese have taken the majority of the power of handling money laundering globally. They offer it at 75% less than the standard rate. There's a lot of reasons economically for that. If you're going to be involved in law enforcement, you better know economics as well. I forewarned, almost 10 years ago, watch China become the big time money launderers. It's all because of capital restrictions. The People's Republic of China will not let a wealthy Chinese person invest more than $50,000 outside China in a given year. Well, what are they going to do? You can't buy a mega million mansion in Vancouver for $50,000. You can't go betting as a whale in the Vancouver, British Columbia casinos. You can't do a lot of things that you might otherwise do. So the Chinese, who are extraordinarily smart, not only did they recognize that they could buy those dollars and sell them to wealthy Chinese, they also needed to set out as many people to run businesses in Mexico, Colombia, all the places where there would be people who would be wanting to buy Chinese currency. So RMB is being exchanged to Mexican cartels, or they'll get them back cash in Mexico. Monies no longer move across borders. Ownership of funds changes across borders. So the likelihood of seizure is substantially reduced. Tell me how much, if you were a Mexican cartel senior person, how much would you like it if somebody was willing to take 10 million of your U.S. currency sitting in Seattle and give you $10 million in a bank account in China, where now you can use that money to go to the unregulated pharmaceutical companies that are get enhancements from the People's Republic of China for being distributors of fentanyl and methamphetamine precursors. They get extra tax breaks. You now have Chinese currency in China that can be used for you to purchase those precursors and chemicals. You can have that money taken to free trade zones, buy all kinds of goods that can be shipped into South America and sold, or Central America and sold, and give you a legitimate cover. You can buy counterfeit goods in China, but you can't buy elsewhere, and really take over the markets in other places, because these are broad criminal organizations. They don't just do drugs. They smuggle people into the countries. They steal resources. They do everything and anything they possibly can, because they're a criminal enterprise. They're not just a drug enterprise. So there is such a huge infusion of different organized crime groups, Albanians, Chinese, traditional Italian organized crime that operate in Colombia, well documented. So, unfortunately, they get along a lot better than we do.
It's that's certainly a scary picture that you did, and you didn't even mention the word crypto. And I'm sure they talk about all the benefits of crypto, lower transaction fees, decentralized exchanges, all this sort of stuff. I'm sure the cartels, it's music to their ears if that is not regulated properly.
Yeah, you can just look on that note. Have your listeners look up a case involving two Russian cryptocurrency exchange companies. Smart was the name of one of them, and I think TGR or TGV is the other one. But anyway, it was documented. The Brits were actually the lead in a multinational case showing they arrested 84 people, couriers all over the world, that these cryptocurrency exchanges in Russia literally exchanged billions and billions of dollars. They picked up cash. They made the crypto available. Why Russia's so good at that? Because on among their clients are spyware operators and people who were ransomware operators. So they would provide the crypto to the crypto companies. Now the drug traffickers want the crypto. The people who are involved in spyware activity and ransomware, they want the dollars, and they swap it off. And so it's very, very clear that crypto is definitely a part of the formula of success. It's part of the emerging technologies, the emerging equipment, and as sophisticated as we get, they get.
I want to ask you one more question, Robert. Is you talk a little bit in your book about demand, demand for cocaine. Who are the folks that are actually using cocaine, let's say, whether it be in the United States or Canada? Presumably those same people who are using cocaine in the 80s and 90s, are perhaps the same type of people who are using it today. You look at something like smoking, maybe a bad example, but through a lot of education and things like that, the rate of smoking has gone down significantly. And again, I realize the use of cocaine and illegal drugs is different, but have we been able to make any progress just trying to cut demand through education and trying to teach people that these drugs, smoking, you get cancer. And that's not going to happen probably for years if you're young. But however, in the case of drugs, it can end quick. It much, quicker race to the finish line, let's say, if you're doing a line of cocaine. Any progress we make on reducing demand?
Well, it seems to me that whatever progress we may have made, but there certainly is a decrease in the amount of fentanyl overdoses. A lot of that has to do with the broad distribution of the chemical that can be used and immediately injected and turns around the effects of the fentanyl that are now available in schools and in many different places. But, what I'm seeing in a trend that concerns me is this perception of resolving these problems with macho and with muscle. That taking away money from programs that address trying to deal with things in a human, in a humanly kind way. Money is being taken away from that in this country so that we can give billionaires tax breaks. But right now, the bottom line is that those programs are going to suffer. I've always said demand is a three-pronged stool. It's not just drug education, and it's not just drug treatment. It's enabling segments of our society to have a fair and equal economic and education opportunity. If you don't include that in the stool, it's going to break. I have two cousins, first cousins, my aunt's two cousins. I grew up with two that have died of heroin overdoses.
Wow.
And one who was very close to that. I worked endlessly for a month to get him a bed in a facility. It was a county facility. It took a month to get a bed. The program was horrible. Luckily, he wound up going to a faith-based program, got clean, has continued to work there. He's a cook in their kitchen, and shares spreading their message, and has made good in his life, as best I know, because he won't talk to me anymore. Because he actually, you can imagine when you're a heroin addict, you'll do anything to get that next hit. And he started stealing money from my mom, getting her to send checks. And my mom at the time had dementia. And that was a line that I didn't care. He was never, ever going to cross again.
Yeah.
And so despite trying to do those other things for him. So, but he helped himself. We have got to recognize that we should be doing as much as we possibly can. And we're not on the demand side. And unless and until we do, there are generations. I can go to here in the Tampa Bay area. You can go to South St. Petersburg. You can go to other areas in Tampa. There are generations of people who are economically and educationally starved, who are part of many, many continuous decades of addiction. You got to break the cycle.
Yeah.
And once you break the cycle, they become productive members of society. They pay taxes. They do jobs. They help other people. Come on, there's so much that we can get out of that. You got to take that seriously. We don't.
I agree. Like, look,
we don't take it seriously enough.
I totally agree with you, because again, you look at the amount of money. You're going to know this better than me. The amount of money that, let's call it the DEA, U.S. Customs, the ATF, the IRS, whoever it is, are fighting to combat this issue. If you took that and reinvested a portion of that even into the programs that you're talking about, the math is going to work out. We're both finance guys. Like again, you can do some math that would show if you move that around and take those funds and put it into the programs, like you say, that third stool, that third pillar on the stool, the math is going to work out probably in spades in terms of proving your point. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I agree wholeheartedly. It's I put it in black and white in both my books. And there are other things that need to be done that aren't necessarily being done, but I think that's one of the most important ones. And my time now, I try to dedicate as much as I can to people in law enforcement. It concerns me that there are people within law enforcement that haven't had the opportunity, as I did, to have experienced leadership take the time and provide me with the training that I needed and the insight that I needed, all the support that I needed. And so we have leaders that, I think there's a terrible saying in law enforcement, big cases, big problems, small cases, small problems, no cases, no problems. And so I always said that 20% of the workforce does 80% of the work. And it's probably worse than that now. And unless they get the opportunity to see that they have the ability to be able to do things that they in their heart of hearts can say, okay, I'm making a difference. Unless they have that, it becomes a situation where we have leaders that never worked cases like the cases that I got the opportunity to work, can't possibly be training other people about how to do them because they've never done them themselves. And instead of simply saying, oh, gee, there's so many obstacles to doing long-term undercover, we've got to start using more informants. Well, that's quicksand, because informants have a lot of credibility problems before juries. And, shame on law enforcement. They should be working today on the backstopping of unknown agents that 15 years from now are going to need to assume those backgrounds. That is a must. That's an absolute must, So, but anyway, it is what it is. And I really do appreciate your giving me the opportunity to speak on your show.
Well, we could talk all day, Robert. I find the topics, and again, you've just brought up certain things that, again, I think are so important to talk about. To wrap it up, I'll end on a question here, Robert. Is the Betrayal? Are we going to be able to see a movie of the Betrayal? I think I had listened to one of the podcasts you did maybe about a year ago, maybe 9 months ago, where you said it was in progress. It would make a fantastic movie. Any legs? It sounded like at the time it was Brian Cranston who was going to who was going to play you again. Is that something we can look forward to in the near term?
I surely hope so. And as we speak, there are discussions that are going on. Unfortunately, we had a made deal with Amazon Studios and had the project with them for 3 years as people worked on trying to develop a screenplay. There was a little bit of dissatisfaction with the screenplay because the screenplay is what carries the film. And Brian and so at the end of that 3 years, it just was a coincidence that I think it was Paramount, some major studio was bought out by Amazon. And so Amazon decided to change their business model and gave a few other reasons. And they said, no, you can have the rights back. So now Brian and I and Brad Furman and other people are in the process of trying to get another studio to consider doing that. And I've got a written proposal for that and a related docuseries that I think would be worth doing. And we'll see. If we don't make it, it's not for not trying. I've talked with Brian as recently as last week, and he's still of the same opinion that he was when I first gave him the book proposal for The Betrayal. So he wants in.
The reality is the Betrayal might actually be make for a better movie than The Infiltrator. You just in terms of the plot lines of that of that particular of that particular book versus the first book. And Robert, anything else you'd want to leave off on? Any other closing thoughts or other projects in the go or anything like that? I know you run your own company. You work with law enforcement agents. Any other closing thoughts from your side?
Well, I also work with the private sector and especially senior executives. American Lawyer is an organization that I've done quite a few presentations to. The nice thing about that organization is that they pick the most amazing places in the world for their conferences for senior execs. So I've gotten the opportunity to go to Lake Como and to the wine country and to Cancun and a bunch of other places. But general counsel for the top, I'd say probably the top 100 companies in the world generally are among the audience. And I like to share with them not just my story, but how it is that they can take experiences from that which I've learned, which in particular includes how to enhance rapport and communication and apply it to the business world because it clearly is applicable and the importance of team building and how to inspire others, with a team spirit. So I enjoy doing those as well. So, and I've told folks, I've got a website, Robert Mazur, my first and last name, no space, mazur.com. There's a contact page, and if there's anything that I can help anyone with, I'll definitely answer. The outreach, I get a lot of journalists that reach out to me, the ICIJ and OCCRP and many other major global organizations, and I collect all of the pleadings, all of the publicity, all the press releases, all the articles on every major money laundering case that happens every day, and collect the library on that. So and I've been able to be a help to law enforcement and to journalists with that.
Well, that's great. Well, Robert, again, thank you very much for joining us today. We very much appreciate your time. We could talk forever on these incredibly important topics. Your career is fascinating, and especially as an accountant myself, we can all look at this as certainly a much different path than the vast majority have taken with their finance degrees, but a different way to leverage your finance degree and doing good for society. So we thank you for that. But Robert, thank you very much for taking the time. We very much appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that wraps another episode of CSI Chat, and I really wanted to thank everybody for listening. If you want to keep up to date on CSI Chat, I would encourage everyone to join our CSI Chat LinkedIn group and or follow us on Twitter/X under CSI Chat. With that, I will get you out of here on a high note with some music, and thanks again.
Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our host an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers meet the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun. From taxes to true crime, we'll find the hidden clue. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. See the case through. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. We'll solve it with some humor and go the extra mile. CSI Chat, where the numbers meet the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun. From taxes to true crime, we'll find the hidden clue. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. See the case through. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. We'll solve it with some humor and go the extra mile. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. Tune in every week for a mix of win facts with a clever accountant who's got your back. We'll laugh and we'll learn and solve the mystery on CSI Chat, where the topic set us free. Tune in every week for a mix of win facts with a clever accountant who's got your back. We'll laugh and we'll learn and solve the mystery on CSI Chat, where the topic set us free. CSI Chat is the podcast you'll adore with our accounting